I saw him once before the night he saved me the second time. And if I had remembered that sooner, I would have run in the opposite direction instead of straight into his arms. The rain came down in sharp needles, stinging my skin as I ran barefoot across the empty parking lot, my breath tearing out of my chest in uneven gasps, every step slipping slightly against the wet asphalt like the ground itself wanted me to fall. And behind me I could hear them, not close enough to touch, but close enough to remind me I wasn't safe. Not tonight. Not anymore. My phone was gone, my jacket somewhere back in the alley I'd escaped from, and all I had left was instinct telling me to keep moving, to not stop, to not look back. But I did look back, just for a second, and that second cost me. My foot caught on the uneven curb, and I stumbled forward hard, my hands scraping against cold concrete as pain shot up my arms. I swallowed a cry and forced myself up, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. And that's when the headlights cut through the rain, blinding, sudden, too close. I froze, completely, like my body had finally decided it was done running. The car stopped just feet away from me, engine low and controlled, not rushed, not chaotic like everything else about my night. Just still. The driver's door opened slowly, and for a moment all I could see was a silhouette stepping out into the rain, tall, composed, untouched by the storm that had reduced me to shaking and breathless. He didn't rush toward me, didn't ask questions, he just looked at me. Really looked, like he was measuring something I couldn't see, and even through the rain I felt it, that weight, that quiet authority that made everything else fade, the noise, the fear, even the men behind me. All of it seemed smaller with him standing there. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, steady. Like this wasn't the middle of a crisis, but just another controlled moment in his world. I tried to speak, tried to explain, but nothing came out except a broken breath. And then the sound behind me got closer, sharper, reminding me exactly why I had been running. His gaze shifted past me, just briefly, and something in his expression changed, not louder, not angrier, just colder, more certain. He stepped forward then, closing the distance between us in a way that felt inevitable, like gravity, like I had been moving toward this moment all along without realizing it. "Stay behind me," he said. And I don't know why I listened. I didn't know him, didn't trust him. But something in the way he said it made it feel less like a suggestion and more like a fact. And as I stood there, soaked, shaking, hidden behind a stranger who felt more dangerous than anything I had run from, a memory flickered in the back of my mind. Faint, unfinished, like a dream I couldn't quite place. I had seen him before. I was sure of it. Just not like this. Not here. Not when everything was about to change. Because that was the moment I didn't understand yet. The moment I would replay over and over later. The moment the man who saved my life stepped into it without knowing exactly who I was. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush. And somehow that made everything around us slow down as if the world had decided to take a breath with him. I stood there behind him, my fingers curled into fists I could not feel anymore, watching the rain slide off the shoulders of his dark coat like it refused to touch him. And the men who had been chasing me hesitated, not because they were afraid of me, but because of him, because of the way he stood, calm, unshaken, like he had already decided how this would end long before they arrived. "You are in the wrong place," he said, not loud, not threatening, just certain, and something in that certainty shifted the air. I could not see their faces clearly through the rain, but I could feel the tension, like a wire pulled too tight, seconds stretching thin. And then just as quickly as it built, it broke, footsteps retreating, voices fading, until the only sound left was the steady rhythm of rain against pavement and my own breathing trying to catch up with reality. I did not realize I had been holding my breath until it rushed out of me in a shaky exhale, my knees threatening to give out as the adrenaline drained away. He did not turn to me immediately, as if he was giving me time to steady myself, or maybe he just did not need to check if I was still there. Because of course I was. I had nowhere else to go. When he finally looked at me again, his eyes moved over me carefully, taking in the bare feet, the trembling hands, the way I kept glancing over his shoulder like the danger might come back if I stopped watching for it. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and it was not soft, but it was not cold either. It was precise, like everything about him. I shook my head too quickly, then winced as the motion made the world tilt slightly. "I am fine," I said, even though my voice did not agree with me. Even though nothing about me felt fine, his gaze lingered for a second longer, like he did not believe me, like he never believed anything without proof. Then he stepped aside just enough to open the passenger door of his car. Get in, he said. Simple, direct, no room for argument. I hesitated, just for a moment, because every instinct I had learned growing up told me not to get into a car with a stranger, especially not one who felt like this, controlled, powerful, dangerous in a way that did not need to be shown. But the empty parking lot behind me felt colder, wider, and whatever had been chasing me still existed somewhere out there in the dark, waiting for me to be alone again. And he was not looking at me like a stranger looks at a problem. He was looking at me like he had already decided I was staying. I stepped forward slowly, the cold metal of the car brushing against my hand as I slid inside. The leather seat warm in a way that felt unreal against my soaked clothes. The door closed with a quiet, solid sound that cut me off from the storm outside. He walked around the front of the car without hurry, every movement controlled, deliberate. And when he got in, the space shifted again, smaller now, quieter, filled with something I could not name. He reached forward and adjusted the heat without asking, warm air filling the cabin, chasing away the chill that had settled into my bones. I watched his hands for a second, steady, precise, a faint scar tracing along one knuckle, and that flicker in my memory came back stronger this time, sharper, like a photograph just out of focus. I knew those hands, or at least I had seen them before. Where were you going? He asked, eyes still on the road as the engine hummed to life. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because I did not have an answer that made sense, not one I could give him. Away, I said finally, and it sounded small even to me. He did not react to that, did not press, just nodded once like that was enough information for now, like he would get the rest later if he needed it. The car moved smoothly through the rain, leaving the empty lot behind, and for the first time since this night began, I felt something shift inside me, not safety, not yet, but something close to it, something fragile and temporary, like standing under a roof during a storm that had not decided if it was finished with you yet. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes for just a second, and that was when the memory finally pushed through, clear, undeniable, a different night, a different storm, and the same presence standing between chaos and silence. I had seen him before, not as a stranger, not as someone new, but as someone connected to the worst moment of my life. And as the car carried me farther away from everything I knew, one thought settled in, quiet and heavy. He saved me tonight. But if he ever found out who I really was, he might wish he had not. I did not sleep even though my eyes were closed, because every time the car slowed or turned, my body tensed like I was about to be thrown back into the night I had just escaped. And yet the steady rhythm of the engine, the controlled way he drove, never too fast, never uncertain, made it impossible to ignore that I was no longer running. I was being taken somewhere. And that realization sat heavy in my chest as I opened my eyes again and looked out the window, the city lights stretching into cleaner streets, wider roads, quieter neighborhoods that did not belong to people like me. I turned slightly toward him, studying his profile in the dim glow of passing streetlights, sharp lines, composed expression, eyes focused ahead like nothing surprised him, like nothing ever could. Where are we going? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He did not answer right away, just adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed but precise. Somewhere safe, he said finally. And the word safe lingered between us like a promise I did not know if I believed. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. You do not even know me, I said, and that seemed like the most important thing, the detail that should change everything. His eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second before returning to the road. I know enough, he replied, and there was something in that answer that made my stomach tighten, because it did not sound like guesswork, it sounded like a conclusion. The car turned onto a long private drive, gravel crunching softly beneath the tires, and I straightened in my seat without meaning to, the gates behind us closing with a quiet certainty that felt final, like a line had been drawn between the world I knew and whatever this was. The house came into view slowly, not flashy, not loud, but large in a way that did not need to prove itself. Lights glowing warm against the darkness, windows tall and silent, everything about it controlled. intentional, just like him. He parked near the entrance and cut the engine, and for a second neither of us moved. The quiet inside the car almost louder than the storm outside had been. "You can stay here tonight," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt, "until things are clearer." I followed his movement a second later, my fingers stiff as I reached for the door handle, but I did not open it right away. "And then what?" I asked, because I needed to know if this was temporary or something else entirely. He paused, just slightly, then looked at me fully for the first time since we left the parking lot. His gaze, steady, unreadable. "That depends on you," he said, and that should have sounded like freedom, like choice, but it did not. It sounded like something else, something heavier, like I had already stepped into a decision I did not understand yet. I pushed the door open and stepped out, the cold air hitting my skin again, but it did not feel as sharp as before, maybe because I was too aware of him standing just a few feet away, watching, not in a threatening way, not exactly, but in a way that made me feel seen down to details I had not even noticed about myself. The front door opened before we reached it. A man in a dark suit stepping aside without a word, his eyes briefly flicking to me, assessing, then away, like I had already been accounted for, like my presence here was not unexpected, and that thought sent a quiet chill through me that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside, everything was warm, polished wood, soft lighting, silence that felt expensive, controlled. I hesitated on the threshold for just a second, because stepping inside felt like crossing into something I could not step back out of easily. "Emily," he said behind me, and the sound of my name stopped me completely. I turned slowly, my heartbeat picking up again. "How do you know my name?" I asked, because I had never told him, not once, and for the first time since I met him, something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not concern, something quieter, more deliberate. "I make it a point to know who I bring into my home," he said, and the way he said home made it sound less like a place and more like a territory, like a space with rules I had not learned yet. I swallowed, stepping fully inside as the door closed behind me, the sound soft but final, and in that moment, standing in a place that felt too controlled, too intentional, with a man who knew more about me than he should. The memory that had been chasing me since I got into his car settled into something clear and undeniable. I had seen him before, not in passing, not in some distant moment, but on the worst night of my life. The night everything changed, the night my father almost lost everything. And now I was standing in the house of the man who was supposed to be his enemy, and he had no idea who I really was, not yet. I should have stopped walking when he said my name, should have turned around and demanded answers, but my feet kept moving forward as if the warmth inside the house was pulling me in stronger than my fear could push me back, the door closing behind me with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have, final in a way that settled into my chest. I wrapped my arms around myself without thinking, suddenly aware of how cold and out of place I must look against the polished floors and quiet elegance of everything around me. He stepped past me then, not rushing, not looking back to see if I would follow, just expecting that I would. And that expectation alone made something shift inside me, like I had already given him permission without realizing it. "You should get warm," he said, his voice carrying easily through the space, controlled, measured, like every word had a purpose. A woman appeared from somewhere deeper in the house, her posture straight, her expression calm but observant. She handed me a folded set of clothes without asking questions, as if this had happened before, as if girls like me ended up here more often than I wanted to believe. "The bathroom is down the hall," she said gently, and I nodded, clutching the clothes like they were something solid to hold on to. I walked down the hallway slowly, my bare feet silent against the floor, each step echoing in my head louder than it should have. The door closed behind me when I reached the bathroom, and for the first time since the night began, I was alone, truly alone. I turned on the light and stared at my reflection, damp hair clinging to my face, eyes wide, skin pale, and for a second I did not recognize myself. I looked like someone who had crossed into a life that did not belong to her. I let out a shaky breath and leaned against the counter, trying to steady my thoughts. But they kept circling back to one thing. He knew my name, not guessed, not asked, knew. And that meant something, something I was not ready to understand yet. I changed quickly, the warmth of dry clothes grounding me just enough to feel real again. And when I stepped back into the hallway, the house felt quieter somehow, like it was waiting. I followed the soft glow of light into a large living room where he stood near the window, looking out into the darkness beyond the glass, one hand resting casually in his pocket, the other holding a glass of something I could not identify. He did not turn when I entered, but I knew he was aware of me. "You remember me," he said, not a question, and the words hit me harder than anything else had tonight. My breath caught, and for a second I considered denying it, pretending that flicker of recognition had never happened, but something in the way he stood, the quiet certainty in his voice, told me he would know if I lied. "I am not sure," I said instead, choosing the safest version of the truth. He turned then, slowly, his eyes finding mine with a focus that made it impossible to look away. "You are," he said, softer this time, but more certain, like he had already seen the answer in me. And maybe he had, because my silence was louder than any denial I could have given. He stepped closer, not too close, but enough that I could feel the shift in the air again, that quiet control that seemed to follow him everywhere. "That night," he continued, his gaze steady, searching, "you were there." And my heart stuttered in my chest, the memory flashing sharper now, clearer, the rain, the tension, the same presence standing in the center of it all, and I realized he was not guessing. He was remembering, just not everything, not the part that mattered most, not the part that would change everything between us. "I saw you," I admitted quietly, because there was no point pretending anymore. His expression did not change much, but something in his eyes sharpened, like a piece of a puzzle had just clicked into place. "Then you understand," he said, and I did not know what he meant by that. Not fully, but I nodded anyway, because it felt like the only answer that would keep the fragile balance between us from breaking. He studied me for a long moment, then stepped back slightly, the tension easing just enough for me to breathe again. "You are safe here," he said, and there it was again, that word, safe, repeated like it was something he could guarantee, like it was something he controlled, and maybe he did. Maybe in his world safety was something you could create if you had enough power, enough reach, enough certainty. But standing there in his house, with his eyes on me and his voice steady, I realized something that settled deep and heavy in my chest. I might be safe from the world outside, but I was not safe from the truth, not from him, and definitely not from what would happen if he ever found out who I really was. I did not know what scared me more, the fact that he believed I was safe here, or the quiet realization that I was starting to believe it too, because safety in his world did not feel like freedom. It felt like something structured, something controlled, something that could disappear the moment I stepped out of line. I stayed where I was for a second longer after he spoke, watching him, trying to understand the rules of a place that had not been explained to me. "You can rest," he added, as if he sensed the tension still sitting in my shoulders. "You are not expected to decide anything tonight." And that word again, decide, like there was something coming, something I would eventually have to choose. I nodded slowly, because I did not trust my voice to come out steady, and turned away before he could read anything else on my face. The hallway felt longer this time, quieter, like the house itself was holding its breath. I found the room they had prepared for me without needing to ask. The door already slightly open, the lights dim and warm. Everything arranged in a way that felt intentional, but not intrusive, like someone had thought about what I might need without asking who I actually was. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, leaning back against it for a moment, listening. But there was nothing, no footsteps, no voices, just silence. The kind that made you aware of your own thoughts whether you wanted to be or not. I walked slowly toward the bed, my hand brushing against the soft fabric of the blanket, grounding, real, and yet everything about this felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life by accident. I sat down carefully, my body finally registering how exhausted it was, how much I had been holding together just to get through the night. But the moment I let myself slow down, my mind did the opposite, racing back through everything that had happened. The chase, the rain, the car, his voice, his eyes, the way he said my name like it was something he had already decided belonged in his world. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to steady my breathing, but the memory pushed forward again, clearer now, sharper, the night from years ago, the one I had tried not to revisit, the one that had changed everything. I saw it again, Not the details, not fully, but enough. The tension. In the air, the sense that something important was unfolding just out of reach, and him, standing there the same way he always did, calm, controlled, like he was at the center of something bigger than anyone else understood, and my father, just out of view, connected to that moment in a way I had never fully been told, only warned about, only taught to avoid. I lowered my hand slowly, staring at the floor as the weight of it settled deeper. This was not random. This was not chance. Out of all the places I could have run, all the people who could have found me, it was him, and that meant something, whether I wanted it to or not. There was a soft knock at the door, light enough that it did not startle me, but enough to pull me out of my thoughts. "Come in," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. The door opened just slightly, the same woman from earlier stepping inside with a small tray. "You should eat something," she said gently, setting it down on the table near the window. I nodded, offering a quiet thank you, but my attention drifted back to the hallway beyond her, half expecting him to be standing there, watching, but he was not, and I was not sure if that made me feel better or worse. The door closed again, leaving me alone once more. I stood there for a moment, then walked over to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the faint outline of the grounds outside. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, the world calmer now, quieter, like the storm had passed. But I knew better. Storms like this did not just end. They shifted, they waited, they came back in different forms. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned toward the room again, my eyes landing on the door, on the space that separated me from him, from everything I did not understand yet. And one thought settled into my chest, steady, undeniable. He thought he had brought me here to protect me. But neither of us realized yet that I had just walked straight into the one place I was never supposed to be. Morning came too quietly, like the house had decided not to wake me, but simply exist around me. And for a few seconds I forgot where I was, my eyes adjusting to the soft light filtering through the curtains, my body still wrapped in a warmth that did not belong to my usual life. And then it all came back at once. The rain, the car, him, the way he said my name without hesitation. I sat up slowly, my muscles stiff but no longer trembling, the kind of exhaustion that had dragged me down the night before, replaced by something sharper, awareness. I was not just a guest here. I was being kept here, not in a way that felt like a cage, but in a way that felt intentional, like every detail of my presence had already been accounted for. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet touching the cool floor, grounding me just enough to push away the lingering fog in my head. And for a moment I just sat there, listening. The house was not silent anymore. Faint movement somewhere below. Distant voices, controlled, quiet, like everything else about this place. I stood and moved toward the window, pulling the curtain aside slightly. The rain had stopped completely, leaving everything outside clean, still, almost peaceful, but it felt misleading, like calm after something unfinished. I turned away and headed for the door, hesitating only briefly before opening it. The hallway was empty, but not lifeless. There was a rhythm to the place now, subtle, organized. I followed it, without thinking, down the stairs, into the same space I had stood in the night before. Only now it felt different in daylight, less intimidating but no less controlled. He was already there, standing near the long dining table, a cup of coffee in his hand, dressed like the night had never happened, like he had simply stepped from one moment of control into the next. He looked up when I entered, not surprised, just aware. "You slept," he said, and it was not a question. I nodded slightly, unsure what to say, unsure what was expected of me in a place where everything seemed to have rules I had not been taught yet. "Sit," he added, gesturing toward the table, and again it was not forceful, but it carried the same quiet certainty as everything else he said. I moved toward the chair, sitting carefully, my eyes flicking briefly to the plate already set in front of me, warm, simple, deliberate, like someone had decided exactly what I needed without asking me. He watched me for a second, not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that felt precise, like he was observing something he intended to understand fully. "You are not asking questions," he said after a moment, and there was something almost curious in his tone. I looked up at him, meeting his gaze, and for the first time since I arrived, I did not immediately look away. I am choosing the right ones. I replied, my voice steady despite everything inside me telling me to be careful. Something shifted in his expression then, subtle, but real, like I had said something he did not expect. Then ask one, he said, setting his cup down with a soft, controlled motion. I held his gaze for a second longer, weighing the moment, and then I asked the only question that had not left my mind since the night before. Why did you help me? The room felt still after I said it, like even the air was waiting for his answer. He did not respond immediately, his eyes staying on mine, measuring, calculating. And for the first time I realized something important. He was not just deciding what to say, he was deciding how much to reveal. Because you needed it, he said finally, simple, direct, but not complete. I tilted my head slightly, not satisfied. You do not strike me as someone who does things without a reason, I said. And there it was, a small risk, a push. His gaze sharpened just slightly, but he did not look away. I do not, he admitted. And there was something honest in that, something that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Then what is the reason? I pressed. And this time there was a pause that felt different, heavier, like I had stepped closer to something real. He leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that felt less like observation and more like evaluation. That, he said slowly, is what I am trying to understand. And the answer settled into the space between us in a way I did not expect, because it meant one thing clearly. He did not fully know why he had saved me, but he intended to find out. And as I sat there across from him, in a house that was not mine, in a life I was never supposed to enter, I realized something that made my pulse quicken just slightly. I was not just being protected, I was being studied, and sooner or later, he was going to discover something I had been trying to hide all along. The way he said it stayed with me longer than it should have. Not the words themselves, but the quiet intention behind them. Like I had unknowingly become a question he was determined to answer. And I could feel it now in the way the house moved around me. Not restricting, not forcing, but watching. Always watching. The rest of the day unfolded in a strange kind of calm. The kind that did not come from peace but from control. I was given space. More than I expected. No one followed me from room to room. No one told me where I could or could not go. But every door I opened, every hallway I walked through, carried the same underlying feeling. This place knew I was here. It had adjusted for me, accounted for me. I stepped out onto the back terrace in the afternoon. The air cool, but no longer sharp. The sky clear in a way that made last night feel almost unreal. I leaned against the railing, letting the quiet settle around me, trying to convince myself that I could stay detached, that I could observe without getting pulled in. But that illusion broke the moment I heard his voice behind me. You are thinking too much, he said, and I turned, finding him standing just a few feet away, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but presence undeniable. That seems to be a problem here, I replied, and there was a slight edge in my voice. Now, something that had not been there before. He noticed it, of course he did, his gaze narrowing just slightly, not in anger, but in interest. You are not a prisoner, he said, and the statement was simple, direct, but it carried something else beneath it, something that made me tilt my head slightly, studying him. No, I said slowly, but I am also not free to leave. The words hung between us, heavier than I intended, and for a moment neither of us moved. His eyes stayed on mine, steady, measuring, and then he took a step closer, closing just enough distance to shift the air again. You walked in here on your own, he said, and there it was, the truth, simple, undeniable. I had chosen this, even if I did not understand the full weight of that choice at the time. I let out a small breath, looking away briefly before meeting his gaze again. And if I want to walk out, I asked, testing something I was not sure I wanted the answer to. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened just slightly, not cruel, not threatening, just firm. Then you will not be safe, he said, and the certainty in his voice left no room for argument. I felt my chest tighten at that, not because I did not believe him, but because part of me did. Part of me knew that whatever had been chasing me was still out there, waiting for me to be alone again. So I stay because I have to, I said quietly. And this time he shook his head, just once, controlled, deliberate. You stay. Because you choose to trust me, he corrected. And that word trust landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I do not know you," I said, and that was the truth I kept holding on to, the line I refused to blur. But instead of stepping back, instead of dismissing it, he held my gaze, steady, unwavering. "You know enough," he said, echoing his words from the night before, and something about that repetition made my stomach tighten again. Because it felt intentional, like he was reinforcing something, building something. I looked at him for a long moment, really looked this time, at the control, the restraint, the way he never raised his voice, never needed to, and I realized something I had been trying to ignore. He was not forcing me to stay. He was making me believe staying was the safest option, and that was far more dangerous, because it meant I was starting to agree. A faint vibration broke the moment. His phone. He glanced at it briefly, his expression shifting just enough for me to notice. Not alarm, not concern, but focus. Sharper than before, he stepped back slightly, creating space again. "Stay inside for now," he said. And this time it was not a suggestion. It was a directive, calm but firm. I frowned slightly. "What is happening?" I asked, but he was already turning away, already moving. "Something I will handle," he replied without looking back. And just like that, the calm of the day shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for me to feel it in the air. Like the storm I thought had passed was not gone at all, just waiting for the right moment to return. I stood there, on the terrace, watching him disappear back into the house. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt it clearly. This place was not just protection. It was the center of something much bigger, something I was now standing too close to. And whether I stayed or left, I was already part of it. The shift in the air did not disappear after he walked away. It stayed, subtle but persistent, like a quiet warning I could not ignore. And for a moment I stood there on the terrace, debating whether to follow his instruction or test the boundaries I still did not fully understand. But something in the way he said it, calm yet final, made me step back inside, closing the glass door behind me, as if that alone could separate me from whatever had just changed. The house felt different now, not louder, not chaotic, but more alert, movement sharper, voices lower, footsteps more deliberate. I walked slowly through the hallway, trying not to look like I was searching for answers, but every instinct in me was doing exactly that. I caught fragments of quiet conversations as I passed, nothing clear, nothing direct, just enough to confirm what I already felt. Something was happening beyond my view, and I was being kept just outside of it. I turned into the main living area again, but it was empty this time, the calm from earlier replaced with a kind of controlled absence, like the room had been cleared for a reason. I moved toward the window, my fingers brushing against the cool glass as I looked out over the front drive. A car pulled up slowly, sleek, dark, deliberate, and even from this distance I could feel the tension that came with it. The driver stepped out first, then another man, older, his posture straight, his movements measured in a way that reminded me too much of someone else. My chest tightened without warning. Something about him felt familiar in the worst way, not recognition exactly, but proximity, like standing too close to a memory I had spent years trying to avoid. The front door opened before they reached it, and I stepped back instinctively, retreating into the shadows of the room, not wanting to be seen, not yet. Voices carried faintly through the space, controlled, respectful, but underneath it there was something else, something sharper. I could not hear the words clearly, but I could feel the shift in tone, like two worlds brushing against each other with just enough friction to spark. I moved closer without thinking, just enough to catch pieces of the conversation as it echoed faintly from the entryway. "Unexpected," one voice said, unfamiliar but firm, and then his voice, calm as always, rarely accidental. The exchange was brief, precise, like both of them understood something I did not. I leaned slightly, trying to see more, but before I could, a hand closed gently around my wrist, not tight, not forceful, but enough to stop me completely. I froze, turning slowly, and there he was, closer than I expected, his eyes on mine, not angry, not surprised, just aware. "You should not be here," he said quietly, and there was no accusation in it, just fact. I swallowed, my pulse picking up. I started, but stopped when I saw the shift in his gaze, not toward me, but past me, toward the hallway I had come from, like he was calculating something. Then his attention returned fully to me, Sharper now, more focused than before. Stay in your room, he said. And this time there was no softness in it. No room for interpretation. I hesitated. Just for a second. Because something inside me resisted the idea of being moved, of being placed somewhere out of sight. But the look in his eyes told me this was not the moment to question him. I nodded slowly, stepping back, and he released my wrist immediately, the contact gone as quickly as it came, but the imprint of it stayed, not physical, something else, something quieter. I turned and walked away, my steps measured, controlled, even though my thoughts were anything but. And as I moved down the hallway, one realization settled in deeper than all the others. The man who had just arrived was not random, not coincidence. He was connected to something that reached closer to me than I was ready to admit. I reached my room and closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a second, my breathing uneven, my mind racing through possibilities I did not want to name. And as I stood there in the quiet, one thought finally broke through the noise, clear, undeniable. Whatever had followed me into this house had not been left outside at all. It had just been invited in. The silence in my room did not feel like silence at all. It felt like pressure, like the walls themselves were holding on to something that had not been said yet. And I stayed there for a moment longer than necessary, my hand still resting against the door, as if I could feel what was happening on the other side through it. But there was nothing, no raised voices, no sudden movement. Just that same controlled quiet that seemed to define everything in this house. I stepped away slowly, forcing myself to breathe evenly, to think clearly, because panic would not help me here, not in a place where everything seemed to be measured and intentional. I moved toward the window again, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the front drive. The car was still there, its presence heavier now that I understood it was not just a visit. It was a shift. Something had changed the moment that man stepped out, and I could feel it even without hearing the full conversation. I let the curtain fall and turned back toward the room, pacing once, then stopping, then pacing again, my thoughts circling faster than I could organize them. He had told me to stay in my room, and I had listened, but not because I was obedient, because I understood something now that I had not before. Whatever was happening was not meant for me to see, not yet, and that meant it mattered. It mattered more than anything else that had happened since I arrived. Time passed. I could not tell how much, minutes or longer. It stretched in a way that made it impossible to measure, until finally there was a soft knock at the door, controlled, deliberate. I froze for a second before answering. Come in, my voice steadier than I felt. The door opened, and it was him, and something about him had changed, not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice. But I did. His posture was the same, his expression calm, but his eyes were sharper, more focused, like whatever conversation had just taken place had confirmed something for him. We need to talk, he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no room for delay. I nodded once, stepping slightly aside as he entered, the door closing behind him with that same quiet finality. He did not sit, did not relax, he stayed standing, watching me in that precise way that made it feel like he was already a step ahead of whatever I might say. The man who arrived, he began, and my chest tightened instantly. He is not here by coincidence. I swallowed, forcing myself to meet his gaze. I figured that, I said, and for a brief second something almost like approval flickered across his expression, gone just as quickly as it appeared. He is connected to the situation you walked away from, he continued. And the words landed heavier than I expected, because he was getting closer, not to the full truth, not yet, but closer than I was comfortable with. I did not walk away from anything, I said carefully, choosing each word like it might matter more than I realized. His gaze did not waver. Everyone walks away from something, he replied, and there was a quiet certainty in it that made it hard to argue. I held his eyes for a second longer, then looked away briefly, buying myself a moment to think, to decide how much I could say without saying too much. He does not know I am here, I said instead, and that was true, at least as far as I knew. His head tilted slightly, studying me. That is what concerns me, he said, and that was not the answer I expected. I frowned slightly, looking back at him. Why? I asked, and this time he did not answer immediately. He took a step closer, not threatening, not aggressive, but intentional. closing the space between us just enough to shift the weight of the moment. Because people like him do not arrive without knowing more than they should, he said quietly. And something about that made my pulse quicken, not because of fear, but because of recognition. That was exactly how my father had always been described, calculated, informed, always one step ahead. I forced that thought down before it could show on my face. But it was too late. His eyes narrowed just slightly, catching something. Not the full truth, but a reaction. You know who he is, he said, not a question. And the room seemed to shrink around us. I felt it. The shift, the moment where everything could tip in one direction or the other. I could deny it. I could deflect. I could stay hidden just a little longer. But something in the way he was looking at me made that feel impossible. Like he would not stop until he found the answer himself. And that would be worse. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, and met his gaze fully. I know of him, I said, careful, controlled, but not a lie. His expression did not change, but the intensity in his eyes did, sharpening, focusing, like he had just found the edge of something important. And what does he want? He asked, and there it was, the question that mattered, the one that could unravel everything if I answered it the wrong way. I hesitated, just for a second, and in that second I saw it clearly. This was no longer just about me being protected. This was about him trying to understand a situation that was now tied to me whether I admitted it or not. And the truth, the full truth, would change everything between us. I exhaled slowly, my voice quieter now, but steady. If he is here, I said, then it means something he lost is closer than he thought. The words hung between us, heavy, incomplete, but enough to shift the air again. His gaze locked onto mine, reading between the lines, calculating what I was not saying. And in that moment I knew I had just given him a piece of the truth, not enough to expose everything, but enough to make him start looking in the right direction. And once he did, once he started connecting the pieces, there would be no stopping it, no turning back. Because the one thing neither of us had fully realized yet was already beginning to surface. I had not just walked into his world by accident. I had walked back into a story that had never actually ended, and this time, there would be no running from it.